Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I am Pervez Khan. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication in Kohat University of Science and Technology. The subject is intercultural communication. The course code is JMC-201. Today is our lecture number 8. The topic is culture shock, elements of culture shock, a multi-perspective. So we are going to talk about the outcomes first, that why is this discussion important, what the students will gain after attending this session. So the first outcome that we're going to talk about is that the students will be able to understand the impact of culture. Very important that they understand how much impact it can have on individuals. And similarly, it will help them understand the dynamics of culture shock. It will also contribute to their intercultural competence. They'll have better understandings of different cultures and situations around them, and it will give them a wider perspective so that they can adjust in different settings. So why are we discussing this? Why this subject is important? Because it's about us versus them, because obviously you go from your own setting to a different cultural place where you understand yourself different from others. So it's very important to understand the term us versus them. And similarly, is it a requirement for a more globalized world? Do you think times are changing and we need to understand our knowledge and we have to increase our knowledge to just fit in the modern world? And more importantly, can it be about the exploring our own identities in relationship to others? Who are we in relationship to others? What our cultural values are in relationship to others? And similarly, does it contribute to tolerance and peace? So yes, all these elements are very important for a more globalized world, modern world, and how it can help us as an individual when we compare ourselves to others. We have our own values, we can learn from them. We also can learn from others if they have something good in their culture. So yes, it's a tricky question. Well, what happens when one goes from one of their own settings to a different setting? So obviously the term is cultural shock. When you go to a newer place, you see the culture which is completely different from yours, the environment completely different from yours, the food, the norms, the beliefs. So obviously it can create a sort of disorientation. So this is what we are going to talk about in our today's class. And obviously we are going to explain the term cultural shock in much more detail. So yes, cultural shock is basically, it was identified by Obad nearly 5 decades ago, and he stresses that human beings experience psychological stress when they move to a completely new culture. Just we talked about, and just like a disease, it has causes, it has symptoms, and it has cures. But obviously, when you go from a different setting, one of your own setting to a different place, that's when the anxiety kicks in. And it refers to traumatic experiences that individuals may encounter when they enter a different culture. Sometimes it can be very pleasant, sometimes it can be traumatic. It's not necessary, there's 100% we can't say anything. But yes, there are different stages. The stages of cultural shock we'll be discussing in our next class, but today we're going to talk about the traumatic experiences, the anxiety, the depressions. And it's important because the more we talk about it, the easier it will be for our students, for individuals to go out there, to adjust themselves in the newer settings, because it's not easy when you go out from your own comfort zone to another place. So this is why we're going to talk more about the anxieties, depressions, the problems, the hurdles. So this is why it's important to talk about it. And yes, now coming to definitions, obviously we need to have a much better understanding of the term cultural shock so we can look into it with a wider lens. That culture shock can be also explained in terms of that about the stress and the feelings of disorientation you experience in a new culture. And if you for a time, that disorientation can be called a culture shock. It can be the feelings of uneasiness. It can be a kind of difficulty that you face when you go to a newer culture. And for this purpose, we'll go more into details again. But I think to explain my point, I have a very short video that when an individual goes from a completely different environment to a new environment, what kinds of problems he or she can face. This is a very, very good animation that I usually play in my class. So this will give you an idea of perspective. I've shared the link towards the end as well. So this will give you a better perspective that when you go from your own comfort zone to a different place, it can be stressful, it can be difficult, you may find it very hard to adjust, but eventually everyone adjusts because you stayed there, you understood people much better, you understood the environment. So this is now, let's see what kind of cultural shocks, and it's kind of funny as well, you can see it, it's pretty interesting.
Back home, life is totally different from here. As part of our culture, we go every Thursday and Friday to the mosque to pray. It's a really nice feeling as I get to meet my friends and relatives. Back home, women always wear long black dress called abaya, with any color of scarf on the head. And men wear long dress called dishdasha, with a cap on the head called kumma. I was studying business back home, where boys and girls sit in the same class but separately. I was always getting C or D's. I got desperate, so my dad decided to send me to Australia. I was so happy, never thought about the troubles I will face here. I packed my stuff and arrived Melbourne on the 20th of August 2007. I was impressed how the transport system was organized. You have to wait in a queue to get a taxi. The next day, I went to the city. I saw guys with colorful, crazy hairstyles. Oh my god, it was the shock of my life. Then I saw a girl wearing black skirt with black top, and her face and ears full of piercing. I was really scared. I ran away heading to the park. I sat in front of the lake, enjoying the nature and the weather. A dog was passing by with its owner. At uni, I entered the classroom and sat beside a girl to feel more comfortable. During the class, a guy came and sat beside me. I was shocked. What is happening? Now, this is my third year, and I got used to everything and enjoying my time here.
So yes, you saw the video. It's very interesting. Initially, when you go to a completely different environment from yours, you'll see many things that can shock you. Your own experiences, for example, the way people eat, the way people talk, the way people. It'll cause a lot of anxiety initially because you might have not seen many things before, and that's where the kind of stress comes in, and that's where the cultural shocks happens. And sometimes it can be interesting. You'll see different characters, you'll see big buildings, sometimes you'll see different clothes, different attitudes. So all these things can contribute, and it can cause a cultural shock. But importantly, let's talk about identity. Identity is very important to talk about identity because it defines who you are in relationship to others. And as anthropologist Ober claims that nearly 5 decades ago, he believed that the cultural shock produces an identity disorientation state. You're disoriented, and your identity, you feel a loss of identity, identity deprivation. You feel your values are not the same. Your status may not be good enough for this place. Your profession may not be in line to what this country demands. So that causes an identity disorientation state, which is very confusing at times. And similarly, in addition to this, it causes a lot of psychological stress. It causes a strain, and you try to adjust in that, but that can also be problematic because you're not used to the circumstances, and you feel rejection by the members of the new culture. So that is where your identity crisis begins. You are in a different place. You've had previous identities. You had identities can be multiple. You can be a Pakistani, you can be a Muslim, you can be a Pashtun, you can be a Punjabi at the same time. But when you go out there, you don't see yourself as such because the people around you have different identities, different cultures, different values. So that's where identity crisis kicks in. That can cause problems, that can cause stress. So in addition to that, there are multiple ways to look into identity, and it causes confusion regarding role, ambiguity. You forget your role. It can be your there's a lot of unpredictability in those circumstances. So yes, this can be problematic, and similarly, it gives you a sense of powerlessness in the situation. You feel powerless. You feel that you cannot cope with the situation. You cannot cope with the circumstances around you, and it happens to most of the times when you are in a different setting, from different culture, from different place, outside your comfort zone. So yes, to summarize all these points once again, culture shock is sparked by the anxiety that results from losing all our familiar signs and symbols of social discourse. And these signs or cues can include more than 1,000 ways, like shaking hands when we meet and how we give tips. So yes, it can be different. And the culture we live in, we have different signs, we have different symbols of social discourse. Signs and meanings can be different in different places. The way we smile, the way we talk, maybe we are from high context or low context culture. That matters a lot. So yes, all these things are sparked by the anxiety, and this is why we feel that we may not be good enough for this place, or maybe we are not made for this place, or maybe we don't have a future. But that's wrong. This is why there's more and more discussions, more and more scholars are writing about cultural shock, that yes, there's a disorientation period, which is followed by an adjustment period. But we'll talk about that in our next class. But it's important to understand that no matter uh, how far you go, how difficult it gets, there's a way to get around it. Nowadays, it's easier because we are familiar with cultures through films, and we have seen many. For example, it's easier to get adjusted in Western countries because you've seen so many films, dramas, documentaries. You have an awareness of how it looks like. But going to a completely different culture where your language, there are language barriers, you don't know how to communicate apart from gestures or symbols, that's where it gets difficult. But still, even you can get around that. And anxiety kicks in, as I said, but this is important to talk that there's a way to get around it. So we go further, and we talk about the ABCs of the cultural shock in terms of the affective, behavior, and cognitive disorientation dimensions. There are three dimensions. We can look into it from affective, behavior, and cognitive. When we talk about affective, like normal things like anxiety, bewilderment, confusion, disorientation, all these kind of things combine to make the decisions you make. You feel unhappy, and these things cause problems for your decision making, for your adjustment making, and you are perplexed. You are not sure what's happening around you. And behaviorally, it also affects you because you don't know how people are going to react. What are the norms of that place? What are the cultures of that place? How people are going to react to you if you are going to pray in a separate room? What are the rules of this place? What will happen if you talk against the king? What will happen if you talk about a political party? So these kind of things that counts in behavior. You tend to observe behaviors, and similarly, cognitively, it's like you try to analyze things and you try to interpret things, but uh, they lack cultural interpretive competence. You can't understand, you can't interpret what's happening around you. So that also creates stress. So, like, yes, these three things, like anxiety, depression, the uncertainty, along with the behavioral attitudes, like the behaviors you see around people, how an Englishman would respond to your salam, or how he would respond to your greeting, or how they would respond to the way you pray or walk or eat. For example, even if you go out to a place where people are having a food which is not halal, it can create problems and anxiety. Similarly, cognitively, sometimes you lose the ability to interpret what's going around you. You can't see, because sometimes in some cultures, some people speak quite loudly when they're talking to each other. And if you are from a country or from a place where people just speak politely, you might find it odd. You might find that they're fighting with each other, which is not which is the normal case. They might be just talking. So you lose your ability to interpret because you're not aware. Only by spending time, by interaction, through interactions, through readings, through most of the time it happens by spending time. You get around these things, and it's not easy. Especially, a lot of things can be problematic. It can lead to ethnocentrism. You believe that your culture is better. It can also lead towards racism. You believe that you are the most superior race in the world. So yes, all these things are associated with culture, and it can be problematic. It can be a good cause for learning, but it's very important in the modern times to be aware of these things, because the more we know about these things, we can find our way, we can progress ourselves, we can improve ourselves. It can lead to a better harmony among different cultures. It can lead to peace. It can lead to prosperity. So yes, understanding of different cultures, traveling, or going or immigrating or going for educational purposes, it gives you a very wide perspective of what's going on around you in the world. You can only understand, for example, by sitting here in Pakistan, we might think that some countries or some people, they might not be good, or they might be arrogant. But when you interact with them, you find that people outside Pakistan, They also have families. Similarly, the image, the media, the image of Pakistan or Afghanistan or any other country, for sake, they might be thinking that since violence has taken place in the last 10, 15 years, this country or this place might be problematic. But it's not the case. When they come here, when they meet individuals, it's a completely different ball game. People have been welcoming. People are welcoming people from abroad. They're hospitable. People talk about these things. It's only because we don't travel, we don't know, so we create our image in our heads, and that also adds to pressure. So the more you talk, the more you walk, or the more you travel, you can reduce your biases, and it can help you give a better perspective. So towards the end of my class, I'll be interested to know that what experiences did you students have outside their own settings? Did they find anything unique? Did they go to anywhere to a place which was interesting? Something that shocked them, something that inspired them, something that caused disorientation? Because after watching this session, I want you to think about your own experiences, because the most important thing is that if you can relate yourself to these circumstances, that would be much better. Because put yourself, if you were there, what you would have done. If this has happened to you, how you would have reacted. And similarly, did you ever face a culture shock? It can even be going from a village to a city and you saw some different clothes or different people, different attitudes, and how did it make you feel? So these are the kinds of questions, if you keep asking yourself, I think it will help a lot coming around the topic. It will give you a wider perspective, and this is what we want from our students, to think from multiple perspectives, multi dimensions, and this will help all those who are planning to go abroad, who are looking forward to multicultural experiences. So yes, it can also be the small experiences that you have experienced from going from a smaller city to a bigger one, or bigger city to a smaller one, or going to village, or going to unique places like Kalash or anywhere else. That very, very important. Value that. Think about that. You can see we are we can see that quite rich pictures that we have seen, and similarly we can see that let me just once again play the video. And yes, so yes, you can see the images. I'm sorry, my screen is just a little on the photo, but anyway, there are colorful photos. All of these pictures are from Pakistan. One is Sindhi culture, one is from Kailash, and the other one is the festival of the Sikh community in Pakistan. So yes, you can observe them. Their holy festivals are interesting places to go. Their ceremonies, the beliefs. You can share, and you can find a lot of interesting perspective by going around places in Pakistan as well. So this is partly a lecture that we've seen today, and I hope that if you're looking forward to learn more, these are the two books that I'm sharing. It's Understanding Intercultural Communication and Introducing Intercultural Communication. These are the two books that I've used material for this class, and it's a very, very good books that you can take benefit of. I can share it with my students if they can share some notes with them if they're interested. We can talk about it. So yes, and towards the end, these are the references that we've used. And so summarize once again. Let's conclude what we've talked about. That if you go out to a culture or a place or a setting which is different from yours, it is likely that you'll experience something different. It can also cause disorientation. It can also cause anxiety. Sometimes it can cause stress. But these are part of experiences that humans have to experience in order to widen their perspective. And it's important that we talk more about it. Some experiences can be good, some can be bad, but we cannot get a holistic picture until and unless we give more time to these places. Anxieties will kick in, the tensions will be there. The three kinds, like affective, behavioral, or cognitive, which is mental stress, that can be there all the time. But the more time we spend, the better perspective we are going to have, and the better understanding can make us valuable citizens of no matter where we are living, but will be useful citizens of the world. So this is our session for today. I hope you enjoyed. We'll talk in the coming days in our next session. Thank you very much for joining.